the freedoms of every American. And I can't understand this, why no one in Congress is raising their voice. And the reason is very simple. And this may be you don't want to hear, I don't know. And I certainly don't want to hurt you on your show. You have one of the best. You're fair. But I believe that Israel has a powerful stranglehold on the American government. They control both members of the House and the Senate. They have us involved in wars of which we have little or no interest. Our children are coming back in body bags. Our nation is bankrupt over these wars. And if you open your mouth, you get targeted. And if they don't beat you at the poll, they'll put you in prison.
What I bumped into at almost every turn were these special interests. And there's no more special interest that has any more influence than the pro-Israel lobby. And so then when I did outreach, for example, to the Muslim community in the United States, I bumped into the pro-Israel lobby, which of course does not want to have to contend with a politicized Muslim community, which is as large as and is as wealthy as the pro-Israel lobby is in the United States. So yes, I first-handedly and also frontally was assaulted by the presence of the pro-Israel lobby to such an extent.
Physically assaulted?
Well, politically assaulted.
Okay.
To such an extent that my father had to ask the question publicly, what does Stone Mountain, Georgia have to do with Israel?
You've advised a lot of politicians over the years on these issues, and tell us what it was like in the past when you were advising somebody, beginning a campaign in terms of what had to be said or not said to win the Jewish vote, and how that's different today, if it is.
Well, as I've listened to all of these amazing comments and a lot of conversation about the Jewish vote, I think the main question that was asked to JJ was about the money. I think that is a big piece of this story and cannot be overlooked at all.
What I was doing was servicing the needs of my constituents. And I was not allowed to do that because I did not toe the line on U.S. policy for Israel.
What line is that they wanted? Were you told directly that you had to toe a line, or explain that to me?
Well, every candidate for Congress at that time had a pledge. They were given a pledge to sign. And I was new on the scene. And so the pledge had Jerusalem as the capital city, the military superiority of Israel.
American Congress people have to sign this pledge.
Yes, you sign the pledge. If you don't sign the pledge, you don't get money.
I started as a finance director. I worked for candidates in the 90s as their finance director, and I would come on a congressional race. I'm a 20-something kid who also knows nothing beyond the state borders, let alone overseas. And you thought about where you're going to go to raise the money that you needed to raise to win a race. And you went to labor, and you went to the choice community, and you went to the Jewish community. But before you went to the Jewish community, you had a conversation with the lead AIPAC person in your state, and they made it clear that you needed a paper on Israel. And so you called all of your friends who already had a paper on Israel that was designed by AIPAC, and we made that your paper. This was before there was a campaign manager or a policy director or field director, because you got to raise money before you do all that. I have written more Israel papers than you can imagine. I'm from Montana. I barely knew where Israel was until I looked at a map. And the poor campaign manager would come in, or the policy director, and I'd be like, here's your paper on Israel. This is our policy. We've sent it all over the country because this is how we've raised money. And so you asked, what does that mean? That means these candidates who, were farmers or school teachers or businesswomen, ended up having an Israel position without having any significant conversation.
But you're
with
saying
anybody
all
in the
Israel
business.
papers were the same. That's a pretty amazing cornering of the market, isn't it?
It's astounding. And when I look back at it, as I was getting ready for tonight, it's shocking. And Jeremy Benamy and I had the great pleasure, thank you, I agree, he's had the great pleasure of meeting each other during the Howard Dean campaign. And one of the conversations we had was, oh my gosh, is there really only one foreign policy on this? Because it felt like it, and that was the case. And now we've got candidates who come in who can get briefed on a whole set of issues related to Israel, and they can sit down with AIPAC, and they can sit down with J Street, and there are others, and it's incredibly important. And so, yes, this country had one very clear, unmovable set of policies, and it wasn't driven by voters. It wasn't driven by voters.
It wasn't driven by voters.
So, for example, it was almost like water torture for me. My parents observed this. I would get a call, and the person on the other end of the phone would say, I want to do a fundraiser for you. And then we would get into the planning. I would get really excited because, of course, you have to have money in order to run a campaign. And then 2 weeks, 3 weeks into the planning, they would say, did you sign the pledge? And then I would say, no, I didn't sign the pledge. And then my fundraiser would go kaput. I made it public. This probably nobody had said anything about it. But I made it public, and then, the excuse was, well, those were just overzealous advocates for Israel. So then the tactic changed. But this is what is done for 535 members of the United States Congress. 100 senators, 435 members of the House of Representatives have to now write a paragraph, which basically says the same thing. So it's not a pledge, but it's a paragraph, and you post it, and, there are these forums you have to go to at the synagogues or whatever. And then, if you don't perform appropriately, then you don't get money to run your campaign. The problem is that it requires an awful lot of money to run a campaign. And whether it's a woman's organization, an environmental organization, people can read about this on the internet if they're interested. If you go to thomas.loc.gov, that is the official United States Congress website. And if you put in the name Gus Savage, because Gus Savage was a black member of Congress who was targeted by the pro-Israel lobby. And he had the foresight to use his position as an incumbent in the House of Representatives to put his experience on the congressional record. For the entire existence of the United States Congress now, people will be able to access his experience.
And I want to let you know what I found. It relates to an organization called the American Israel Political Affairs Committee.
And what he wrote was that it was the Garden Club of New Jersey that gave his opponent $5,000. But it wasn't really the Garden Club of New Jersey. It was the activists who were associated with AIPAC.
AIPAC's major goal is maintaining the level of foreign aid to Israel, now $3 billion a year, and defeating arms sales to Arab countries. Now, what it's beginning to show you is that the interest, the purpose of AIPAC is to promote a foreign nation, not America's interest. An organization operating within America, composed of Americans, in the interest of a foreign nation. interfering in the internal affairs and the elections of this nation. Let's see what kinds of interference, for what purpose, and who do they attack. Let's watch this. This article written by the same Charles Babcock. It says this, now listen closely. One case centers on a year-old internal AIPAC staff memo urging that Jewish reporters, and I'm reading from this article, this is not Gus Savage saying this. One case centers on a year-old internal AIPAC staff memo urging that Jewish reporters raise questions about Jesse L. Jackson's sex life and finances. AIPAC, pursuing the interests of a foreign government, beginning to try to develop surreptitious means of hurting, damaging a presidential candidate in this nation. This gets closer and closer, as you would notice, to something un-American.
You could feel it. And I managed a Senate race in 2006, and we were like, should we talk to J Street? I don't know. Are we going to get in trouble? Is it going to cause us problems? Boy, I kind of like what they're saying. Like, that conversation happened.
But what were people fearful of? Were they fearful that, you know, if we say X, we won't be able to go to Miami anymore, we won't be able to go to New York?
No more St. Louis, no more Cleveland, no more certain parts of New York. Yeah, you thought that the money was going to be gone.
It was just going to dry up.
Yeah,
overnight.
and this isn't about presidential money, where there's so much money coming in on presidential. These are about House races and Senate races that are different. They're not getting millions and millions of contributions at $27 a pop. They really have to go get those $5,000 PAC checks from the pro-Israel PAC in St. Louis.
It's an objective assessment that no one will have the courage to speak about. They're controlling much of our foreign policy. They're influencing much of our domestic policy. Wolfowitz, as Undersecretary of Defense, manipulated President Bush #2 back into Iraq. They pushed definitely to try and get Bush before he left to move into Iran. We're conducting an expansionist policy of Israel, and everybody's afraid to say it. They control much of the media, they control much of the commerce of the country, and they control powerfully both bodies of the Congress. They own the Congress.
Are you an anti-Semite?
No, I'm not. That's exactly what they're going to say, and I expect that. What I am is an American. And you see, I think America comes first, and we have a one-sided foreign policy in the Mideast, and we've alienated Arabs who have no way of fighting. So what they've done, and I predicted this on the House floor, is they would export violence to America, and they have. They have no other way to fight. I think President Obama knows this. I think he sees this. I think he wants to do something. I think his hands are tied. And I think he's dancing between the raindrops, trying to figure how I can politically machinate some scenario to mitigate these problems. Greta, I'm saying this. America is in danger if America doesn't take back the government without foreign interference.